You know, your relationship with a cold beer or a glass of wine, it didn't start at a modern bar. It didn't begin at some ancient Roman feast or in a dusty medieval tavern. It actually began about 10 million years ago on a forest floor in Africa, with a small, unnamed primate picking up a piece of fruit that had just been sitting out in the hot sun for a little too long. Because as it turns out, you didn't choose to love alcohol, you literally inherited it. And the evidence for this wild inheritance, it's been hiding right there in your genetic code and in the oldest archaeological sites we've ever discovered for the entire history of our species.
So it forces us to ask a pretty fascinating question. When did we actually discover the stuff? I mean, most of us naturally assume it's a relatively modern invention, right? Like maybe a happy accident that happened when we finally settled down and invented farming a few thousand years ago. We picture early humans just sort of stumbling upon some fermented wheat they accidentally left out in a clay pot. But what if I told you that this craving is a hardwired biological instinct, one that predates Homo sapiens entirely? 10 million years. Let that sink in for a second. That is how long our evolutionary lineage has been seeking out alcohol. Long before we had language, long before we even figured out how to harness fire or built anything we'd recognize as a civilization, our distant ancestors were already adapting to a world filled with naturally occurring ethanol.
Okay, let's dive into this. Back in 2014, a biologist named Robert Dudley published a theory that's so beautifully simple, it completely shifted how we look at human evolution. He called it the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. The theory basically says this: when fruit falls from a tree and ferments on the dirt, it naturally produces ethanol. Now obviously our primate ancestors didn't know what ethanol was. They just knew that if fruit smelled a certain, slightly funky way, it was way riper, sweeter, and absolutely packed with life-saving calories. So over millions of years, they didn't just learn to tolerate alcohol, they biologically evolved to hunt it down.
The biological evidence. Let's look at the genetic clues hiding inside your own body.
So in 2015, a team of scientists managed to basically reconstruct this ancient enzyme called ADH4. This is the specific protein our bodies use to break down alcohol. And what they found changed the game entirely. They discovered that right around 10 million years ago, a single highly specific genetic mutation occurred in the common ancestor of humans, chimps, and gorillas. And this one mutation made ADH4 40 times more efficient at processing ethanol. 40 times! That's not a fluke. It was a massive biological adaptation that happened right when our ancestors were shifting from living up in the trees to foraging down on the ground, where all that fermented fallen fruit was sitting around. Alcohol wasn't some vice to resist. It was a giant neon survival signal saying, "Eat this."
And hey, we are absolutely not alone in this. Look at our shared primate cousins. Over in Malaysia, palm wine toddy cats regularly knock back naturally fermented palm nectar at concentrations that would literally have a grown human spinning, yet they don't show any signs of being drunk. Even crazier, wild chimpanzees in Guinea have been caught on camera fashioning these deliberate little leaf sponges specifically to soak up and drink fermented palm sap. Think about that. That is calculated tool use just to get a buzz. Seeking out fermentation isn't some unique human weakness. It's a primal survival tool we share with the rest of the animal kingdom.
The forensic archaeology. Let's shift our investigation from DNA evidence over to some incredibly ancient crime scenes. In 2018, archaeologists were digging around in Raqefet Cave near Haifa, Israel, and they found something that completely broke our timeline of human history. Carved directly into the solid bedrock of the cave were these stone mortars, and when scientists analyzed the microscopic residue stuck inside them, they found traces of wheat and barley that had been intentionally soaked, germinated, and fermented. Guys, we are talking about deliberately brewed beer from 13,000 years ago. Here's why that timeline is impossible. The Natufian people who brewed this weren't farmers. They hadn't even invented agriculture yet. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers out picking wild grain by hand, turning it into beer thousands of years before they ever turned it into bread. Now you might be wondering, how on earth can we possibly know what was sitting in a rock basin 13 millennia ago? Fair question. The answer is molecular archaeology. It's this rigorous forensic science used by experts like Patrick McGovern over at Penn. By scanning the microscopic chemical biomarkers left behind on ancient stones and pottery shards, scientists can definitively ID these ancient fermented drinks. It's a method that literally turns a broken clay pot into a time machine. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how incredibly specific these chemical fingerprints are. Every fermented drink leaves behind a totally unique molecular signature. If the lab detects tartaric acid, boom, they know for a fact they're looking at ancient wine. If they find calcium oxalate, which brewers actually call beer stone, they've found a grain-based ferment, like beer. And beeswax esters point straight to mead. Because of these signatures, we don't have to guess anymore. We know exactly what our ancestors were brewing. And following this forensic trail leads us straight to Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. This site is just mind-blowing. 12,000 years ago, nomadic hunter-gatherers pulled off the impossible. They built this colossal site with massive 10-ton carved limestone pillars. Keep in mind, this is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge and way before anyone was farming. For decades, archaeologists scratched their heads, why would nomads do this? What was the motive to organize all that brutal labor? Well, then they found massive stone vats right there on the site, coated in chemical traces of fermented grain. Vats big enough to serve hundreds of people. This monumental site was likely built by nomadic strangers for the express purpose of throwing massive communal drinking parties.
A catalyst for civilization. Let's look at how this ancient biological drive might have actually built human society. Let's move to China and see how this builds. In a Neolithic village called Jiahu, dating back 9,000 years, they found pottery jars holding the oldest confirmed alcohol recipe in the world. And it wasn't just some primitive slop. It was a highly sophisticated blend of rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn berries, all deliberately fermented together. Whoever mixed this up 9,000 years ago, way before the wheel or written language, knew exactly what they were doing. They were expertly balancing flavor, potency, and preservation.
And that brings us to the most provocative question in this whole investigation. Look at the sheer physical effort of baking bread versus brewing beer. Baking bread, it is a massive pain. High effort. You have to grind the flour, knead the dough, manage the temperature perfectly, and time the bake. But brewing early beer? Incredibly low effort. You just soak some grain in water, let the wild yeast in the air hit it, and sit back while natural fermentation does the heavy lifting. Given that 10-million-year-old biological drive wired into our brains, is it really so crazy to think early humans might have finally settled down and invented farming not to bake bread, but specifically to guarantee a steady supply of beer?
And this brilliantly illustrates why alcohol became the total bedrock of early civilizations. Fast forward to 3000 BCE in ancient Egypt. Beer was absolutely not a luxury. It was critical infrastructure. Look at this table. It was a literal paycheck. The crews hauling stones for the pyramids, they were paid 4 to 5 liters of beer every single day. It was public sanitation too. Because brewing requires boiling the water and makes it acidic, that beer was vastly safer to drink than the parasite-filled water straight out of the Nile. And it was medicine. Beer was the base ingredient in over 100 prescriptions in ancient medical texts. It was the literal lifeblood keeping the whole empire running.
But maybe its absolute greatest function was acting as a kind of social technology. Across thousands of years and totally different cultures, sitting down and drinking together did something nothing else could. It dissolved the natural barriers between strangers. From a pure neurochemical standpoint, sharing a drink drops your anxiety, gets you to open up, and synchronizes the behavior of the group. If you are a small, vulnerable band of early humans, the ability to sit across from a potentially hostile neighboring tribe, share a drink, and actually lower your guard, that was the ultimate survival tool. It was the social glue that allowed us to scale up from tiny tribes into the massive cooperative societies that built the modern world.
The verdict on your DNA. Let's summarize the evidence.
So the crucial point is this magnificent, mind-bending timeline. Let's trace it one last time because it's wild. 10 million years ago, a mutation in your ancestors' ADH4 gene permanently hardwires the pursuit of alcohol into our biology. 13,000 years ago, nomads are brewing beer in a cave before they even know what farming is. 12,000 years ago, they're moving 10-ton rocks at Gobekli Tepe just to build a communal pub. 9,000 years ago, they're perfecting craft cocktails in China. And 5,000 years ago, the Egyptians are literally using beer to fund the pyramids. This entire epic scale connects a tiny primate grabbing a funky-smelling piece of fruit directly to the very foundations of human civilization.
Every time a glass is raised, a 10-million-year-old biological circuit is completed. Sure, the ingredients have changed, the glasses are fancier, but that ancient evolutionary impulse, it is exactly the same. You didn't develop a taste for this as some modern cultural habit, you inherited it as a primitive tool for survival. The rocks remember, and so does your DNA. So the next time you raise a glass to celebrate, ask yourself, are you just engaging in modern culture, or are you surrendering to a 10-million-year-old instinct?
If you enjoyed this journey through deep time, like, share, and subscribe, and join us